Hey guys, welcome to the Lunge and Lift podcast. Today we're joined by a very special guest, Mr. Tom Forder of Chalking Fitness. Chalking Fitness is a UK centric CrossFit podcast where Tom interviews all sorts of people involved in the community, from the sponsorship side of things, athletes, coaches, and he's got a great insight into behind the scenes of the CrossFit community, but also the wider functional fitness scene. So stay tuned if you want to hear some thoughts and perspectives on the controversial dismissal of Dave Castro from CrossFit as the director of sport, and also his thoughts on how CrossFit is evolving both at the community level, but also at the elite end and competitive side of things. But before we get into it, please remember we are running a competition in ahead of our 100th episode, where we're giving you a chance to win a muscle imbalance assessment and 2 months of stronger group coaching, as well as a 60-minute call with Rob and I to go through all your training plans, thoughts, and strategy for how to get the results that you want. All you need to do is share your favorite episode from Lunge and Lift on Instagram and tag us at lunge.lift. You can also get 2 entries by subscribing to our YouTube channel, which we're trying to grow, and 3 entries if you write us a review on Apple Podcasts. As ever, a big thank you to our show sponsors, wit-fitness.com. Use discount code LL15 to get 15% off your order. And Hytro, use discount code LL20 to get 20% off your order. All right, let's get into it. Tom, welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
I'm really well. Thank you very much for having me on.
Great, it's our pleasure. And for our listeners who might not know who you are, please could you give us a brief intro as to who you are and what you do?
Certainly, yeah. So my name's Tom Forder. I'm a member of the UK CrossFit community, a very passionate member of the UK CrossFit community, as I'm sure there are many out there. I'm the kind of like, what would I call myself? Like the creator, founder of Chalking Fitness, which is predominantly an Instagram channel, but it has a podcast which mainly kind of has guests from across the UK centric CrossFit and functional fitness kind of scene. But over the kind of last 18 months, I've had kind of guests from abroad as well. So that's kind of a big part of what I do in my spare time, is running that podcast, but also kind of dabbling in kind of like competition stats and kind of like competition news, community news as well through Instagram and more recently through a newsletter. So that's kind of like a brief intro on why people might have heard of me or not heard of me.
Amazing. And I think it's become an amazing resource for the CrossFit community over the last couple of years. Could you tell us what made you so passionate about CrossFit? How did you get into it in the first place that led you to start it up?
Yeah, certainly. I was thinking about this yesterday actually, and I've just ticked over 8 years doing CrossFit. So I kind of just it was really random how I came across CrossFit, and so back in like 2013, I was living in Bath. I was at university in Bath at the time, and I was probably doing like circuits like twice a week. And the instructor was like, "Oh, you should check out this CrossFit thing." And so this is probably in kind of like November kind of 2013. And I just kind of Googled it. And, what are the chances that you're in Bath? So you Google CrossFit and you get CrossFit Bath.
Yeah.
But all I saw before I did it was like, I think I maybe watched like the Jason Khalipa video where it's like, where are the machines? Where are the machines? So I've spoken to a lot of people who have like seen like the Netflix documentaries and were like, damn, I want to be like the next Rich Froning. But I had like none of that as far as I was aware. And so like January 2014, I turned up at CrossFit Bath and did like the month-long on ramp with the likes of Alec Harwood and Ollie Mansbridge, Adam Shackle and Ed Mason, and it just opened my eyes to kind of fitness in a way that I'd never experienced before. I was always sporty growing up, but I was never very good at being sporty. So but I kind of just always stuck at it. So, playing football as a kid, playing rugby at like secondary school, so 11 to 16. But, I typically like start on the bench, right? But it didn't it didn't stop me from doing it. And I think it's because like it was something that I really thought was valuable to be involved in. I'm sure my parents thought it was something to be valuable to be involved in, so they kept kind of driving me there, even though I wasn't kind of like the star of the show. So I have a lot to thank them for. But yeah, through uni, kind of it wasn't really about fitness. I didn't join any kind of like I wasn't part of any kind of sports teams or anything, and probably did a bit of running like most people do, kind of did a few half marathons and stuff. But then, yeah, like I say, 2013, which I was in my late 20s by then, I kind of like walked into kind of CrossFit Bath and have like never looked back. I mean, I'd say I'm like all in, but I'm not all in like the typical way where like competing and nutrition on point. It's more just that I really value. It was the first time that I took fitness home with me. It became more of a lifestyle. So I'm fascinated by the information that's readily available, whether it be through the coaches in the gym or available online. And I think whilst CrossFit is only a small part of the wider fitness kind of industry and fitness kind of like I guess community, it's really helped to kind of like, at least for me, drive it into like mainstream and things like that. So yeah, that's kind of like how I found CrossFit. And like, so that was 2014, but Chalking Fitness only really came along in 2019 as a bit of an accountability project. It was a time when I needed, I was actually struggling a lot of the time, and needed something constructive outside of my day job. I was just spending a lot of time mindlessly scrolling, and I was like, you know what, I want to contribute rather than just consume in this sphere. I'd always enjoyed dropping in at boxes. So I wasn't just someone that would like, and I mentioned like, I was taking fitness home with me, but I'd always drop in at a gym, at a CrossFit box, if I was on holiday, and I was always hanging around talking about stuff, whether it be like biomechanics of movement. Like, I'm a bit of a geek, right? So I can lose so much time on it, and so I just started like in 2019 creating a little bit of content, mainly around just accountability for myself. And then in 2020 started the podcast, and given that I'd always enjoyed talking to people about kind of fitness, but more specifically CrossFit, I've not looked back since. It was phenomenal to just open the conversations to more people than I was typically just seeing within my own gym and my own training. And yeah, I'm humbled every time I get to talk to someone new, because everyone's got a different story, everyone's got different expertise and experience, and the rest is on Instagram, really.
Do you know what I find fascinating is that I've always felt the same thing with CrossFit, that fitness goes home with the individual, and it's because it really, as you said there, because it really does become part of your lifestyle. And I found even when I got into CrossFit as well, you start to invest everything into it. As in, like, you start thinking about mobility work. You're like, cool, I need to do this. How am I going to improve my next session? How am I going to do this? How you're thinking about all the little things, and then you're like watching stuff online. It seems that CrossFitters have that thing of just diving in and just really embracing the sport as it is. And it's really funny you say about like when, say, people watch, say, Rich Froning or those, but when you watch that documentary, every second counts, and you see like kind of what CrossFit was, and you can imagine, especially when you're getting into that time, it's close to around the time when it was still kind of like that, still quite raw, still quite, it was in its early days. And now obviously you see it and how much it's developed. How have you found like the programming from all the boxes? Have you found it's gone a lot more competition specific compared to, say, how it used to be, which it was quite obviously like GPP, getting you ready for everything? Have you found the experience change over the years that you've been doing it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been I was going to say established, but I've been like a month in, month out member at 3 different affiliates over like those. Is it 3? Yeah, 3 different affiliates over that kind of like 8 years, and each of those is different. But it's one of the things I definitely tried to do with Chalking Fitness is look at the full pyramid. So you've got the elites at the top of the pyramid, but then you've got this huge base of kind of like, GPP, those who are just kind of like maybe just wanting to come in and sweat, and actually they don't think about kind of CrossFit outside of that, and they don't even know who Rich Froning is, and that's absolutely fine. But I think as the methodology has grown and then the sport is growing in the UK, the size of that pyramid gets bigger. And so when it comes to programming, the challenge then is that you're trying to kind of like satisfy everyone. Like how do you ensure that like you're giving a good sweat session to those, who are just coming in for the best hour of their day, but aren't, interested in kind of getting, some of the higher skill gymnastics, or aren't, stepping on a competition floor. Now, I can imagine some people might be listening to that. It's like, no, high skill gymnastics can be part of the programming at every level. And I think, but that's down to the kind of the coaches and those to decide, okay, is that something that we have got the time and experience to be able to invest in to kind of coach that kind of like safely at every level. But I've definitely seen that. And I think to be more specific, like looking at kind of like, let's just look at the top of the pyramid first, is that you've got we've got games level athletes in the UK. And what you're seeing now is that it's not just about training. You don't train for kind of competitive CrossFit by doing CrossFit anymore. It's more around looking at the different disciplines and being like, where are my weaknesses? Where are my strengths? Okay. And we see it with people like Matt Fraser as well. He went off and, ran with a high school running team, right, to get better at running. Swimming, like Rich Froning introduced swimming to get better at swimming. And, someone like Chris Hinshaw is amazing for that. But we see it more and more now in the UK, where it's like, you're not just doing kind of like a WOD of the day, or workout of the day even, to kind of get better at the elite level, kind of CrossFit, or even just like national level CrossFit. You're having to kind of you're spinning all these different plates. And that means that it becomes increasingly more like, if you say you do 2 hours of training a day to be a competitive athlete at the kind of like, let's say like the national level in the UK, people are like, yeah, so what? Like, that's, but that's tough. So I think that's how we've seen it kind of change at the top, in that if you want to progress in the sport now, it's not serendipitous, because there's too many people that you need to be kind of like, you need to be all in into competitive CrossFit, not just all into kind of CrossFit.
Especially as they're getting younger as well. Like they're getting younger into it. So the bodies are getting even more like conditioned, and they're coming in at 16, like doing amazingly. Like you watching like the games just gone and looking like the girls that went in, and you're just like, it's insane to see them hanging with the seasoned big dogs and doing really well. You're like, just where is this sport going in the next, say, 5 years, let alone say 10 years? It's amazing.
Yeah, I'm interested to get your thoughts on that, Tom. Actually, in the period of time that you've been in CrossFit, it's evolved so much, and like you're alluding to there, the professionalism is increasing. So now some of the elite guys are full time when they previously never were. How do you see that affecting the competitive landscape? Because the good are going to get better faster than the grassroots people who don't have funding, who have full-time jobs, and they just can't train as much as the guys who are professional. Do you see that as a problem?
I think it's definitely a problem, but it's probably like a problem you kind of can't get away with. It's like, one of the challenges with driving a car is that you need to put fuel in it, right? And that costs money. So like, and I think one of the things is probably because it's such a young sport, and it doesn't have that same level of kind of like governing body, because the nature of the CrossFit affiliate model is that people have that freedom to do what they want, whether it be in terms of doing a functional fitness competition or kind of like how they compete. And so there's not yet that established development route. But equally, like talking about kids, like, I say kids, teens that are coming in having been training for like 7 years already, because the sport's so young, it doesn't have that, like, every elite athlete hasn't been training for the same amount of time. They've often come in from a different sport. Maybe they've got a rugby background, a gymnastics background, or a swimming background. So there's not kind of like one road to Rome, right? It's kind of like people can be coming in different ways. But we were talking about this the other day in terms of, as we see more and more brands kind of like getting into the space, like, and I described it as like an S curve. So at the bottom, you've got kind of those that are like aspiring, like they're competitive athletes, but they're doing it alongside a full-time job. And then at the top of the S curve, you've got those who have made it professionally. Your Tia Claire Toomey's, your Rich Fronings, your kind of like Justin Medeiros, Matt Fraser, right? And then on that, in the middle bit, which is like the vertical bit of the S, you've got those who are so would benefit so much from just getting that kind of like funding to allow them to go full time, and it's like going full time allows you to get better, getting better allows you to get sponsorship, getting sponsorship allows you to go full time. There's a bit of a kind of like, it's a fortuitous circle, but if you don't get into that circle, then how does it happen? Like, so I think, some of the big programming companies, the likes of like JST Compete and kind of the athlete program, just to name a couple of them, like Red Pill and would be a third, like they're I guess they're probably with their own athletes trying to look at those who have shown promise. They've got the experience within their coaching staff to then see like, okay, who's got potential here, who would benefit from being able to, as like Reggie did, right, quit his day job and move down and kind of like train full time with Steve and Jack in the team. So it is a problem. I think it's an inherent problem with probably every sport. Like I've been fortunate to chat to kind of like some other kind of big coaches in the space, and they're like, it happens in other sports. You're just not aware of it because you're not as invested. Like I was never a massive like football fan or anything, but I'm sure if I followed my like local town football club, I'd probably see players there who are having to try and compete every Saturday in like non-league football, but also hold up a job as like a whatever. And there's probably similar conversations go on there as go on in kind of like the CrossFit and functional fitness space.
Yeah, totally. I think it's a shift we're starting to see in the professionalization, that the big companies are starting to recognize that they need to sow seeds and invest in almost youth development programs, because like you say, it's that chicken and egg situation where you need, it's like we talk about getting a job, you need experience to get a job, but you need a job to get experience. And same goes for CrossFit athletes. Yeah, you need to be good to get sponsored, but to be sponsored you need to be good. So people are going to have to start looking younger and younger to try and spot these people, to invest in them, to then get the success, which means they can then make more money and feed the cycle. And I think it is probably going to move towards like a grassroots. A few companies will start laying out grassroots programs to feed that pipeline.
I think it has to, because the thing is, when you are now looking at the sport becoming a legitimate sport, where you are now getting these youths coming in, and I say like the teens, and when you're looking at the teen divisions in general, like how good these athletes are and how strong they are. The fact that we only really just come around to the fact that women can strength train and not get massive, right? Realistically, it was the past since CrossFit's come about has told people that that's a thing. So if you think just in the last 10 years, there's been a very, very slow shift in how women train, let alone how men train. And now we're now going into this transition where we've got like these teens that are now strength training because they're realizing it doesn't necessarily stunt their growth, which was always a bit of a myth back in the day, that who knows. And then it's now getting to the point where we're getting these amazing athletes, incredibly strong, and they're 16. You're just like, what that's going to look like in 10 years time, like that 16-year-old, like look at these teens. And I think it's the risk of a company, say, taking a look at getting these kids in and basically making like an academy, essentially like what they do in football, just like what you said there, how it happens elsewhere, we just don't hear about it. It's just because we're not involved in that sport or that industry or whatever it is. It always happens. It just only becomes apparent once you're not necessarily affected, but it's in your space, then you get to see these things.
Yeah, it's something I'm really passionate about. Like, again, not being a competitor myself, and also I guess I didn't say at the beginning, like I'm not a coach in any kind of capacity, and I know you boys both are. So like, you're saying there around, we're seeing teens coming in who are doing strength training and stuff, and because the methodology in the sport is so young, it's going to be it's the mind boggles to see the likes of kind of people like Mal O'Brien coming in and just like holding their own, both in terms of like metabolic conditioning and strength, with those that have been in the sport for a lot longer and are also 5 to 10 years her senior. And so that's amazing to see, and it'll be fascinating to see how they progress through the sport. What's their longevity in the sport? Can they continue to get stronger and stronger and kind of like fitter and fitter? And are they still going to be kind of throwing down in their late 20s? That'll be kind of really cool. But for me, and like I've just become a father, like I'm really excited to see kind of grassroots stuff coming through. And I think the thing with like development pathways like that is that it is sowing seeds to the future. There's not immediate benefit for those that kind of facilitate that. I mean, that, in national sports, where you've got like maybe a development pathway to a GB squad, right? That's all about funding that comes in and like the medal drive, right, for the Olympics or whatever the equivalent might be for a sport. And obviously CrossFit doesn't have that in the same way. And the more mainstream it becomes, the more that it will attract funding. And yeah, I think that'll be cool. And I know that there's still a lot of work to be done to kind of like improve, say, teen training and stuff like that. But the programs that exist right now, they've got to focus on the kind of like, let's say, the adult kind of training plans first, because that's what's, not to make it about money, but at the end of the day, you got to be able to run a business. That's what's lucrative right now. But if you look at what, say, like Comp Train are doing, so with Ben Bergeron over in kind of CrossFit New England, their Comp Train Academy that they've kind of proposed, I don't know whether they've started it yet. The base level of that is like basically a teen academy. And they've got big criteria there on that. They don't just do CrossFit. They have to play at least 2 other high school sports. And they're only allowed to be in the gym a certain number of times a week. So, I think it's important to like, not specialize as broad as CrossFit is. You don't want people specializing too early, because I think it's important to kind of have that, the last sentence of CrossFit in 100 words is like learn and play new sports, right? And it's ironic how many, including myself, I do CrossFit to get better at doing CrossFit, which is a bit kind of like, so yeah. Anyway, I could rattle on about that, but I really hope to kind of see that like over the next kind of like 5-10 years is kind of that clear pathway for, and we already see kind of CrossFit making it into schools and stuff, but more and more of that. But that's to be expected as the sport tries to mature and kind of like backfill that development pathway.
I think also just like this is a bit of an experiment, looking at how we've kind of seen what happens to, say, a lot of these older athletes going through to older age, like how long can they last in the sport and so forth as the sport's developed. And like you said there, we now get to see kind of what happens to the teens. Are they still able to kick it in their mid-20s? Which for someone like yourself and myself, my daughter was only 3.5. I'm like, cool, I'm not necessarily going to push her into CrossFit, but I can kind of watch what happens to these athletes and say, okay, is this it's a bad thing to do? You're experimenting on people, but it's the only way you get to learn. And right, because as you said, it's such a new sport in reality that we don't know. We're only making the best decision that we can and the best choices that we're hoping for the athlete. But at the end of the day, if you talk to Mal when she's like, say, 24 and she's had a great career, but her body's starting to break down, you can ask her, was it worth it? She'll probably say yes, because she's been competing at the top level. She's created a base for her, and she's only 26. And she can then actually now taper out and go, say, into coaching and stuff like that. So she can actually set her life up a lot more by getting it all front loaded in these early years, and then actually taper on into, say, a more chilled out job later down the line and get them more passionate.
It's like what Steve Fawcett said when he came on the podcast. He said in the early days of CrossFit, they always used to joke about, we have no idea what's going to happen to us in 10 years' time. It is just a running experiment. And I think that applies even more so to the teens, because, well, something we say often, that what most people consider general physical preparedness is actually very specific physical preparedness. And it relates to what you were saying there, Tom, about you do CrossFit to get good at CrossFit rather than trying new sports. And that is a specific kind of physical preparedness. Like if you're getting good at handstand walks, that has a very specific use that doesn't necessarily translate to wider life. So it's great to hear that Ben Bergeron's encouraging the teens to continue playing their high school sports and limit just focusing only on gym. Because it's Ben Smith, wasn't it, who did CrossFit since he was a really young child?
Yeah,
only did CrossFit and no other sport.
Yeah, there's awesome videos of him like learning to kind of like clean and jerk in front of his fridge in the garage, right? And like, and that, I mean, there's something special in that household anyway, with all the Smith brothers, right? So, but yeah, I know for one thing with my daughter, I kind of joke. I always joke with my wife. I'm like, I definitely don't want her to lose those squat mechanics, right? That kids have, right? It's a real sore point for me. Ash, I said to you, I feel like I move like a bag of spanners. I'm like, if all I can do is make sure that my daughter continues to like move well to the best of her ability, I'll be happy.
You say that, and do you know what's cool though is because I do say, if you take this, say, 10 years ago, our parents probably didn't even know that. Like that, it wasn't even on the forefront of shit. Actually, you might start moving like a bag of shit later down the road, and we actually now know what can we do. And like you're promoting, say, sport, movement, climbing, like all the things that we used to say do as kids, like say climbing trees and stuff, which nowadays just aren't done. You're going to maybe push your kid towards even like the more soft play, doing these things, being more exploring and getting their body into positions that, so they maintain this level of like strength, stability, mobility all throughout their childhood and going beyond. You don't want them to break down.
I think I was thinking earlier as like, about kind of the amount of information that can be made available to you through kind of like having a lifestyle that's orientated around fitness. I do joke because I very much class myself just as like, fitness is an outlet rather than a focus or a profession for me. But it's like sometimes I look back and think, oh, ignorance was bliss. Like when you didn't know about like nutrition and mobility and recovery. Now, admittedly, I wasn't putting my body through training, so you could say at least in the short term it wasn't as important. But that ignorance is bliss in the short term is where the risk is long term, right? Because that's probably the prerequisite for kind of like chronic disease and chronic pain further down the line. So, Rob, to talk about what you were just saying there about all that information being available that perhaps wasn't available to our parents is like, but then there's like knowledge is power, right? So you say ignorance is bliss, but knowledge is power. So I think it's recognizing that it's a double-edged sword, but just any knowledge is better than no knowledge.
Yeah, it's abundance, ain't it? It's trying to sift out through the noise of all the information that is out there because there is so many conflicting ideas, and especially when it comes to kids, is that's still a minefield in itself because no one really truly knows what's best for them because every kid develops differently, right? And it's like there's a rough blueprint and a rough path for them to say go down to maybe give them a fighting chance later down the road, whatever they want to do, but really it's just experimentation. Just like I say, Ben Bergeron there, just still keep up with your sports because look at some of the best athletes, as you say, they come from sporting backgrounds, so they have had that. And like I know Ash loves like Mr. Triplaner, like that's what for sport is, right? You're moving through all different shapes and spaces, and when you do enter the gym, it does start to become very static. Even through like say dynamic movements, it still is rather static. So
So, Tom, I wanted to go back to something you said earlier about the wider fitness community. I think CrossFit's led the way in making functional fitness available to the masses and really popularized it. And now we're seeing all sorts of other slants on functional fitness rise up. How do you see the wider fitness community developing, and what do you see as the interaction with CrossFit? Because there's all sorts of functional fitness competitions that aren't CrossFit. How do you feel about that, and what do you think of it?
I think it's really interesting, and I've spoken to those like very integral and central to the kind of like the UK CrossFit community, and I can understand their point of view that like what they're doing is CrossFit, and I pride myself on being able to be quite impartial and like seeing, but equally being able to see it from everyone's point of view. For me, kind of as like Gen Pop kind of average kind of person who loves CrossFit, I'm like, the more people doing functional fitness, the better. Now, if everywhere that like includes functional fitness in their kind of like coaching or training decided to affiliate to CrossFit, great for CrossFit, but like it has to be good for that kind of like facility as well. Like there has to be kind of like it's an investment, right? Okay, if we brand ourselves CrossFit, what do we gain from that? And I can completely understand it. An individual or a brand might look at that and say, actually, we don't need to do that. We have more freedom not being CrossFit. I don't have to worry. I don't have as much skin in the game as say others, because I know that Carl Steadman and Rachel Steadman have talked about one of the biggest challenges that affiliate owners sometimes face is that like they're providing CrossFit and then down the road there's someone else who's providing something very similar. I can understand that's going to be really frustrating. I have not experienced that because I'm not an affiliate owner. But at the same time, like, I think I can understand, like, in the modern world, like, you need to have competition, right? Because it's like, all right, well, down the road, there's another gym that isn't, that's offering something similar, but isn't kind of calling itself CrossFit. I was like, okay, well, sit down and work out how do we show that by being CrossFit, having CrossFit above the door, makes us the place that people want to be
Yeah.
versus the place down the road. And if you can do that as in a most constructive and competitive way as possible, then actually it increases the quality for everyone involved. I'm sure that's triggering loads of people, right? Because again, I recognize
That's Greg Glassman's view, wasn't it? Greg Glassman was just like, anyone can open a box anywhere because the best ones will survive. One thing I wanted to dig into a little bit more, though, you said just now that by not being affiliate, that affords you some freedom. Could you explain that a little bit more, please?
Yeah, I think like that's an interesting one, isn't it? What I think. What I mean by that, and maybe it's maybe I'm incorrect in saying that, but I think if you're a CrossFit box, then there's an element that the brand and the sport will create a certain Joe Blogs on the street will have a certain expectation of what it is that you provide, and so that could sometimes be quite unnerving or quite kind of like, oh no, I can't do CrossFit. And we see that a lot in that, like, a number of affiliates are branded differently, like they're kind of like ex fitness, they're not ex CrossFit, but they are an affiliate, and so it's kind of like there's something like one example would be like Motion Training, home of CrossFit Surbiton. And I think from like the brand, like CrossFit as a brand, I think is amazing, but it can also be quite intimidating. And so now you could say, well, just do what Motion have done, or do what many other gyms have done, have your brand but affiliate. And I think that's, and again, that comes down to the individual. So the other thing we're seeing, I think, is that, like, so a bit more freedom is that, like, and again, I've not got skin in the game, but being able to offer a wider spectrum of classes can really open it up. So whether it be that you've got kind of like, you've got Pilates going on, you've got kind of like therapy rooms, you've got spin studio, because there's horses for courses. We're never going to see everybody doing CrossFit. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier. We need variety, and it could be that then, like, well, we're not going to call ourselves CrossFit whatever, because actually we're a multi-use space, and then so we're going to be whatever. We're going to be a fitness collective or something like that, and then it's about, well, okay, do we want to appear on the affiliate map? Are we aligned with the values of kind of CrossFit as a brand? And then we'll affiliate accordingly. So I'm sure you could get that freedom as an affiliate, but equally I can understand how the two could be mutually exclusive as well.
The thing is, on this though, is I think not countering that, but my worry is that I think it's kind of good when say just functional fitness gyms stay as functional fitness gyms, because if you're signing up to a CrossFit box, you'd kind of hope there's a general how you are supposed to train. This is what's kind of a bit tricky, because obviously every box has their own way of programming. And as a newbie coming into CrossFit and they think they're going to get one thing, and actually that box programs very comp specifically, like not really like the actual CrossFit methodology, then they're going to get a tarnished opinion of CrossFit and say, oh no, it was too specific. I was snatching on day one and I just couldn't get it. Maybe they don't have a CrossFit fundamentals. They don't have any of these foundational things that they might have to go through. Like you said, you went through a bath, you had that opportunity. And I think where a functional fitness gym has the opportunity to be just like CrossFit, but maybe the high skill stuff is only then for the people that want to spend the extra time, but all their classes, they don't include, say, squat snatches, ring muscle ups. That's going to be for like your maybe extra class in the evening, or like your extra, say, pro package or whatever like that. And I just think it's great that more and more gyms are seeing the benefit of functional fitness on it, not only for just the body, but also I think for gym space. It's amazing how much you can do now with such, like, the amount of people now got home gyms, including myself, right? And you've got this small space essentially, and you can do near enough everything and get great workouts. Whereas before it used to be, okay, what machines do I have? What this do I have? And you was, I can only really do, maybe go for a run and some say bench work. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, I think this is my only, say, only deterrent about, say, functional gyms, say, not like, say, Motion doing it and being CrossFit. It starts to blur that line, as in, like, what are you? Are you a CrossFit gym that's going to provide CrossFit training, or are you a functional fitness gym providing a complete package outside of just the sport?
Yeah,
the
and this comes
methodology.
back to kind of what Ash said earlier around how does programming develop if the elites are getting more elite, but you equally want to make sure you keep your doors open to those just starting their fitness journey. And I think, you know, the purists of the methodology would be like, there's room, you know, it's infinitely scalable, but that is hard work for a coach and a programmer. And you know, if we say that, you know, and I definitely, you know, and I've experienced it myself, where like just because you're you can get there's many different flavors of CrossFit at many different CrossFit kind of affiliates, right? And some can be quite down like the competitive route, and again, it can be then that can be driven by the community that train there as well, right? If you've got, you know, and there's a bit of chicken and egg there, does it become more competitive because there's a lot of competitive people, or vice versa? But then just like say like space and stuff, but like say for example you've got those that just want to come in and do like, let's call it a metcon class where it's dumbbells and kettlebells and body weight movement, and then but then those want to do gymnastics, those want to do weightlifting. You suddenly start adding in those classes, and like, well, how many of those classes a week do you need? You know, and so suddenly you need to kind of be putting on, you know, 40 classes a week, you know, maybe even probably more than that. And then especially for the high skill stuff, and this comes like, you know, I guess hat off to Bath when I did my on ramp, I'm pretty sure there were maybe 12 to 16 of us in the on ramp, and we had at least like 4 coaches. So that kind of coach to kind of like participant ratio was amazing. And especially when you're trying to learn those high skill movements, because one of the things I'm fascinated by is that difference between instructing and coaching. Like I'd say instructing is at the front of the room, just saying kind of like clean, jerk, right? You know, maybe like body pump style. But then like coaching needs to be specific to the individual. And, you know, regardless of whether it's CrossFit or not, I think you look for that individual touch point with every participant in the class. But if you're trying to teach people to do like deficit handstand push-ups, like, you know, that requires both skill and kind of time to do that as a coach. So, I guess to answer your question, Rob, around like, oh, does it blur the line? Like, I guess that can be offered at a functional fitness gym and a CrossFit affiliate, but regardless of either, like it requires really good coaching and really good awareness of what it is you're trying to offer in each individual class.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point there, Tom, in that because it's so broad and there's such a wide potential market, it's almost a case of if you try to appeal to everyone, you end up appealing to no one. And I think these functional fitness, non-CrossFit gyms are targeting that bottom of the pyramid, to use your analogy again. Just if there are people who are put off by the more elite side of CrossFit, they're niching themselves into basic functional fitness, which is more accessible to a certain demographic in the market. And CrossFit can be infinitely scaled, but that's quite hard to communicate when you have a really competitive set of members. Say you turn up at a gym and you've got 15 people with their tops off, all ripped and massive, and you're like, this isn't my niche. This isn't the fitness that I'm looking for. And I think that's where those different niches,
It's even if you Google like toes to bar, for example, which I think is a great kind of example of like a higher skill gymnastics movement, right? We're not going as far as like pull-ups or anything, but that kind of like core strength and coordination, lat activation that's required to do toes to bar. If you Google that and like even go to the kind of primary source like CrossFit.com, you're going to get someone like James Hobart or like Julie Fouché demoing it, right? And they're still a specimen, right? And they're still like, you know, and I get that you want your demo to be kind of like perfect because you don't want to kind of instruct incorrectly, but you got to recognize that like, and I think it's almost like you want to be able to Google toes to bar, but then what you want to see is you want to see the kind of progressions to that, you know, whether it be like lying on the floor with a PVC pipe or whatever, just kind of like, you know, just working on that lat activation. But again, like, you know, if you're trying to like, right, class, you know, you've got 20 in the class, say, we want to do toes to bar, and then actually you've got to go through, and there might be kind of like 8 different scaling options that you need to kind of like go through. Like that's like 20 minutes, right?
Just on that, I think is so something I was really proud of, and I guess Ash is probably similar. When we started out at WIT, and like always having the 2 coaches, so we had a demo coach, a main coach, and as soon as the class kicked off, you're going around touch points with everyone. Right, cool. This is how to improve X, Y, Z. Actually, bring it down to this scale, and I think it does then start to bring the onus onto the coach themselves. So as you said, CrossFit is infinitely scalable, so you're all doing the same type of stimulus, which is the whole purpose of CrossFit, right? That anyone can do it. The problem is, it's then the ego gets in the way for most people. Like, why am I doing ring rows and that person's doing ring muscle ups? And it's like, when it's that thing of, even though they know they haven't got the skill requisite to get to the ring muscle up yet, and probably not for the next 6 months, they feel demeaned because they're doing ring rows compared to that. And it's same like handstand push-ups. So I'm using the box still and I can't get any better. It's like, but just remember, we're all getting that same stimulus of the workout, a vertical overhead pressing. You might be sitting there doing dumbbell presses because you can't use your hands. And I think it's, as we're all starting to understand, Courtney said it in our episode where she said she don't like the word scaling, but I'm like, scaling is, you're going along a path, right? You need to understand where you are between, say, 0 and 10, right? You need to say, cool, which stage am I at? And that's where I'm going to get the same stimulus as someone at that top end.
Yeah.
And I think once we start to, I think as a species, kind of get over the ego side of stuff, which takes time, because I remember most of my training was ego-led. But it's like, as I have got a little bit older, which generally what happens as people get a bit older, they start to get a little bit less egotistical and use it only at times. But that's when you realize, okay, cool, I'm still getting the same work as this 22-year-old over here, and I'm 42, and we're getting that same stimulus from the day session. So just to kind of round that up, I do think it then becomes coach focus. It's the coach that needs to take that ownership of making sure that that person's CrossFit experience is exactly what it is, and then they understand why they're doing seated dumbbell presses, not deficit handstand push-ups.
Yeah, and I think, and you mentioned around scaling, like when we say RX on the board, right? And very much people think of like, oh, that's RX weight, but it is about like RX. I think is short for prescription or prescribed, right? And it's the prescribed stimulus, but it does require you to check your ego. And you'll see that written in gyms all the time, like in an affiliates, right? Check your ego at the door, but easier said than done.
Yeah.
But you can get a really good stimulus through many different kind of like routes, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the RX weight, as it were.
Totally. All about that training stimulus. A bit of a left turn here, Tom. One thing that I think you're uniquely well placed to discuss is sort of the, I don't want to say gossip.
I was going to say gossip. It has to be gossip.
Gossip side of the fitness community. And there's a couple of topics we wanted to get your thoughts on. One was the removal of Dave Castro as director of sport in CrossFit, and the other is the Monster athlete sponsorship. Please, could you just summarize for the listeners what exactly has happened in both of those cases, and then maybe give us your thoughts on it?
Yeah, certainly. So the first one, and I think you described it as the removal of Dave Castro. I think I said Dave CrossFit, which is probably a suitable Freudian slip, right? And removal is the right word. So very kind of like suddenly, it's been announced by kind of like CrossFit, Eric Rosa, like the CEO of CrossFit, that Dave Castro, who was the director of sport, instrumental in programming for the games, would be how a lot of people know him. Was no longer with the company, and Dave's kind of comments off the back of that were like, "This is not a mutual agreement. I have been fired," essentially, with immediate effect, which created like a lot of outrage. And I think we kind of go into that into a little bit more detail. The second one you mentioned was the Monster sponsorship. So at the 2021 CrossFit Games, we saw athletes being handed cans of what looked like Monster Ultra as they finished each event. Turns out actually it had water in it, but I mean, I imagine there's some intern somewhere who just was like, it doesn't have to be Monster in there. Yeah. Like, it's just about brand awareness. And so they were a big kind of like visible sponsor at 2021 CrossFit Games. And actually what we've just seen announced is that they have come in with their sponsoring kind of athletes. And when they say athletes, I think they've got some of the biggest and best in the sport in terms of Justin Medeiros. I think Tia Claire Toomey, Mal O'Brien is an up and coming kind of athlete. We've spoken about her already. I think Chandler Smith, Noah Olsen, Danielle Brandon. Right, so they've if they were doing fantasy, doing fantasy fitnessing picks, they've got the kind of all the shinies there. That's for sure. So there are two big things that I guess that would be kind of like two things that happen. both of those events have definitely caused immediate outrage and surprise within the kind of CrossFit community, I think.
On that is the way I kind of looked at it, because I don't know anywhere near as much information on this as possible as you do most likely, but what I find fascinating is just looking at from an outsider, that looks like every other sport. We start looking at UFC, you start looking at motocross, and all these like monsters sponsoring all these athletes essentially, right? So why is it that I know obviously the whole thing with CrossFit being, it's where Glassman originally come in and like against these big companies like Coca-Cola and stuff like that. And now you've got essentially Monster coming in sponsoring your top athletes. It's the complete opposite side. But when you are looking to grow the sport, it's, as you said, that's where the money starts coming from, these big names, and that's how we're going to grow as a sport and really become recognized.
Is that CrossFit selling out?
Kind of.
Well, it's
progression.
Yes, exactly. And I think, again, not having informed, but I don't have that same amount of skin in the game, and equally, I'm more than happy to kind of like argue both sides. I have a habit of like sitting on the fence, and I was chatting to Chase Ingram recently, who's a big kind of like pundit and kind of known within the space, and he was like, I will give my opinion, I won't stay on the fence. So maybe I'll try and do a bit more of that. But I agree with you, it's necessary progression, it's growth of the sport. One of the things and social media is terrible for it, is that people kind of jump into the comments without being fully informed, and that's the case regardless of the topic, not just within CrossFit, within the kind of like wider world. And it's kind of like, and I'm not saying this is everyone, but there's plenty of like uninformed outrage out there. And, so one of the things and this is the case for both like, Dave Castro, and I think for the kind of like Monster sponsorship, is that initially you look at like a big sugar fizzy drinks company sponsoring kind of CrossFit Games athlete in bed at the highest level, both on the kind of corporate side and on the kind of like athlete side. That feels like a mismatch in values. But what there is behind it is, and when people like Glassman was so against big sugar, but there's actually a lot more kind of subtlety. Well, subtlety is not the right word, but Glassman was fighting big sugar because of what they were doing to try and Big Sugar, I believe, were funding the legal battles that went on between the North American, I don't know what the name of the organization was, but essentially they were trying to oust CrossFit trainers from being able to do their job under a CrossFit qualification. So way back when CrossFit was kind of coming back, like in the early noughties and the mid noughties, there was a big battle between, and I should know what the organization was, but let's call it, it's a certifying body in the US for kind of like personal trainers and stuff, I believe. They were launching a case against CrossFit to say it was dangerous, it was causing injuries and things like that. And my understanding is that kind of Coca-Cola and Pepsi were funding that legal battle for the kind of like national kind of association. So it was like, there's a lot of bad blood.
So to stick up his ass, basically, what he wanted to sort out and say like, fuck you, look, this is, I've won here, basically. That was the whole thing of Glassman, wasn't it? He wanted to show that his vision was right and that he's.
So it was set, and I believe it was settled out of court. So you can kind of understand it from a health point of view, like fizzy, sugary drinks. That's not something that we should be associating with. But there's a lot more kind of like, kind of muddied water, I think, when it comes specifically. And speaking about this on Plate Stack Chat, which is another podcast I'm involved with, we were saying it's like people are always going to be sensitized and triggered by like a brand that they feel passionate about partnering with a big brand that perhaps is, in this case, like a non-endemic brand, right? They're always going to be triggered by that. But I think this one, that is a natural part of growth. But this one specifically is kind of like, I don't know, I'm trying to think like, a famous footballer moving from Man
U to Man City kind of thing.
It's that type of thing. It's great. It is great for the sport. But there are many people that will take it as like a personal affront.
Short term, I think their focus is so short term that they can only see this. But I think, as you say, people that aren't going to be necessarily directly impacted, they understand the long term vision. And something that I actually recently found out, I was listening to Ben Bergeron on Modern Wisdom, and Ben Bergeron was saying how Eric Roza, he didn't actually buy it. He's kind of the front man of the the investment. So obviously, it's a massive. There's all this money coming in, and he has to now grow this sport.
Yeah.
So he's going to look beyond just the CrossFit grass, even though he is a huge fan of the games and everything like that. And he wants to make sure that he wants to see that grow to its fullest potential. And I think that was why, as like with Rosa being now at the head, I think that seeing what he wants to make the sport deals like this with Monster, like it makes sense because it is the next step in the evolution.
Yeah, I don't think kind of Eric Rosa would have been as successful as he was in his previous endeavors in kind of like tech by being kind of like overly romantic and overly attached to things because of what it did for him in the past. I could be wrong. If he wants to come chat to me, I'd be more than happy to. But it's about like what makes sense at a business level. And like I say, he's not sole owner, right? He's not just written it out in his checkbook and bought it from Glassman. He is the front of an investment company, and they will, they will see that like CrossFit is ripe for growth. And so, partnering with Monster will not be the last of the big kind of like potentially upsetting kind of partnerships we see, but it's an inherent part. And I was talking about this the other day, and that like we've mentioned how like CrossFit like is a lifestyle, like, and there's people can be attached to the romanticism of that, in that like it's kind of theirs, they feel part of it, they feel like, we've not talked about Dave Castro yet, but people will feel like he's family. And so they feel personally affronted by what is being done, but it is, it's being done from a business point of view. We assume it is. We'll never find out. I presume that Dave and Eric haven't had a punch up somewhere, and it's like it's a personal vendetta. I'd be very surprised again. For Eric to be as successful as he is, he's going to know how to kind of separate personal from business. So, but because of the kind of like the culture of CrossFit, people feel, they love the brand and they love the individuals that they think represent the brand. They're going to be really upset because that's that short-term view. And there's nothing wrong with the short-term view, but it is something that kind of like can happen.
So let's go back to Dave Castro. I was personally quite surprised at the level of outrage from his removal, because from my perspective, he was almost universally hated, and the fact that people valued his contribution so much was surprising to me. So why do you think they have removed him? What like business benefit do you see by changing him out? And let's start with that.
Yeah, I think, I wasn't surprised at the level of outrage or dismay. What I thought, I guess before on that, it was really nice then to see that what came out of it was that people highlighting how much he's done over the best part of like 15 years. Why do I think he's been moved out? We'll never know for certain, but if we talk about growth of like the CrossFit brand, the CrossFit Games brand, I think it's easier to sell that to big brands when it is like a bit more polished in terms of it's like, it's not people, it's like an organization. And like, I loved the idea that he was like university loved, university hated, right? He was a bit, he could play both, right? And I think he was typically the villain for those that didn't know him, but anyone that knew him was just like, this guy's, there's no one more genuine. And I'd love to meet the guy at some point and kind of get some time with him. But I do have a feeling that maybe in the kind of, the medium to long term for the CrossFit Games, they needed something that looked a little bit more kind of corporate.
You needed a yes man as well. You needed someone that hasn't had such an influence on the sport, because Pete Adgie's like this balance between outrage and like, okay, so good thing is he has been part of it for so long. How do you change something and you send it on a new path? And someone like Dave, which is and essentially programming the games, which is what obviously the pinnacle of the sport is. How do you make it grow when you haven't got someone that you can say what to do?
Yeah.
And when you've got investors, they're the people that you need to be pleasing, right?
I think you get it in any organization. So like, and Glassman and Castro like really close, and he posted a picture of him with like Glassman like recently, and people like, oh, maybe that was the smoking gun. But like the thing is like you need like both Castro and Glassman are kind of disruptors. They're entrepreneurial. They're willing to push against the status quo. That's what CrossFit had to do for the best part of 20 years, was to kind of like fight. And we talked about their fight against kind of like, I guess, like mainstream fitness, trying to be accepted. And we've definitely moved to that stage now where, whilst it's still niche, it is kind of more accepted that, like, you know, CrossFit is like good for people and like has real potential. But like that entrepreneurial spirit and that kind of tenacity that kind of Glassman has, Dave Castro has, and he'll be willing to, he'll tell you what he thinks, right? He'll tell you to F off, right, if he's not happy. But you can imagine then with like someone like Rosa coming in with like financial backers, like it's like we're moving from like entrepreneurial startup to kind of like an organization primed for growth. And it's inherent. And I'm sure there have been many other corporate examples where like you see big changes within the kind of like upper echelons of an organization, because, okay, we're changing gears. We're changing from guerrilla fitness to kind of like global growth.
Yeah. I think that's a really great way to see it, actually, that a startup CEO is very different to like a growth CEO to a you know, Fortune 500 CEO. I think the roles are very, very different. And that's, probably a big part of why Dave was not appropriate. I think he did quite poorly in a couple of the press conferences around Black Lives Matter, and I think that doesn't look good to investors and shareholders.
That's the rumours are going over to Rogue, isn't it, and make the Rogue Invitational bigger than, well, that was just like a rumour, and very unlikely to happen, but who knows. But there was the thing about him going to, because of how big the Invitational was this year, as in just like, that's only going to grow into something. And same as Wadapalooza. Wadapalooza looked epic. Like, you know, these individual games essentially are growing. That's what they said about Dubai, right? When like the purses were so high, like they can go over there and earn a massive amount of money for every single competitor. And you're like, I've got to be going there. So then their seasons are split up into the games and say Dubai, and then you got all these other little ones along the way. But it's fascinating.
I will say I'm not happy with how it seems it was done with Dave. I think for someone who's given so much to the organization, you know, but maybe, you know, we're never going to know what happened behind closed doors. You know, maybe that was originally like what was hoped, but you know, and I think that's the other thing I'm really hoping to see is like, if this is part of a bigger picture, let's start seeing the bigger picture, because that's what sometimes it's felt CrossFit, both under the old kind of CEO and the new kind of like new guard, is that it feels a little bit kind of like, I mean, and again, I've not got skin in the game, I'm just a member of the community, right? But you don't see behind the veil, right? Okay, right, Dave Castro isn't part of the go forward picture. Well, what's the go forward picture then, right? You know, and Justin Berg, who's the new director of sport, right? He was kind of like, I guess, GM of the games before that, working under Dave. Like, he's been on the kind of CrossFit Games podcast talking to Chase Ingram. I need to listen to the full thing, but I do still think they're feeling their way out, right? You know, but I think it's because they're almost playing Buckaroo. Like, they've got such a volatile community that they kind of like are probably trying to like work out what works, you know, and we kind of see that there's so many things across the CrossFit brand which they're trying, whether it be CrossFit Health and this, that, and the other. Like, they're just like, you know, more online competitions. It's all about, okay, what are the potential revenue streams that we're not kind of like, how can we, actually that's maybe a bit cynical, what's the additional value we can bring to the community, underscore what's the revenue streams that we're not capitalizing on.
What's interesting, you said there about like the volatility kind of the community, and it's what's interesting is you look at back when the Floyd thing happened, when Black Lives Matter, and like the amount of de-affiliations and stuff like that. So the community were like, this isn't right. And I think what's interesting is like, that's kind of like a sign of the times. And like, whereas people have to be a lot more conscious about what they're saying. And I think that kind of goes full circle to when you're looking at someone like Dave, if he's still at the top of something like, say, CrossFit, and you're not sure what he's going to be saying or not being part of, you need, like when I mentioned about Yes Man, you kind of need that consistency. So you've got a consistent brand image, which kind of goes back to that bit where I mentioned at the start. When someone wants to start CrossFit, you want to kind of go to a box and kind of know what you're going to get. And that's where I think it's that interest in... I'm massively intrigued to see where this is going. And I think it's, as with everything, it's going to be changing. And I saw Dave put out the thing, I wonder if they're going to use it in my open workouts. I wonder what's going to happen there, because this open will be an interesting one.
And I think as well on that, like, we could talk about this for, another hour, but there are so many out there who probably don't even know who Dave Castro is. And I think that kind of speaks to it, is that, there are those like ourselves who are a little bit more invested in that kind of that level, but there are many who are just going into there. And I've spoken about this, is that what people need to know, whether it be Monster brand partnering with athletes or Dave Castro being fired from CrossFit, it doesn't change what happens at the affiliate level, which is, and Rob, you were saying there, the issue is people don't necessarily know what they're going to get when they walk into an affiliate for the first time. But equally, what it does mean is, it does mean, regardless of what kind of like turmoil is going on in HQ, actually, it doesn't change what you're going to get at your gym. A thruster will still be a thruster. Your coach will still be as diligent and as caring as they were previously, and your mates will still hopefully cheer you on as you're dragging yourself through burpees.
That's a nice way to think about it. Tom, before you go, one topic I wanted to get your thoughts on, I think it'd be really useful for the listeners. Given you've interviewed so many interesting and influential people on your podcast, could you give us some takeaways, like who maybe surprised you with some knowledge bombs, and why?
So, I mean, yeah, I've been very fortunate to speak to so many different people. I've always tried to look across the spectrum. Again, you can kind of like hunt out the top of the leaderboard, but equally, I really enjoy talking to coaches, and one of the thing, and brands as well. I'd say some of the, like, recently, I've loved every episode. I'm grateful to everyone, because they just give their time, they give their experience, they give their insights for free. And I think people need to realize that, same with you guys doing a podcast here, right? It's like, people can just go listen to that for free. You can listen to someone sharing their experience, sharing their expertise for free. And this is, and there's so much out there. So I think that's what makes podcasts brilliant. To answer your question specifically, like, what I've loved, and I guess it's again because like CrossFit is so new, is that people come from so many different backgrounds. And so two that I'll mention, a recent podcast, actually, they might have been back to back, actually, was I spoke to Matt Tucker from CrossFit Nidus. So he's Netta Tucker's husband and kind of like their co-owners of their box. I hadn't realized that he, has like a background in engineering, and kind of, I know you boys both have got kind of corporate backgrounds, but he kind of like found CrossFit relatively late, background in rugby, but he's applying his kind of like, I guess, his professional kind of experience then into the box, and kind of like the non-negotiables they have in running a successful gym. Was so inspiring. And actually, I'm going to talk about three, because the other one, I spoke to Sandy Gibson from Jolly Sailor CrossFit just after the SID. And both of them, one of the things I'd felt is that, because I spend so much time immersed on social media, is that we know that there are bad things about social media, is that it's people's highlight reels. And I worried that I was creating an imaginary gym that doesn't exist, in that you take the community from here, you take the coaching from there, you take the the facility from there, and that you create this kind of like perfect kind of facility, and that's what CrossFit, or that's what a fitness community should be like. And both Matt and Sandy both showed me that, like, and I'm sure there are hundreds of other coaches out there, hundreds of other facilities, like, now there are people who are doing it and doing it right. And that they are creating amazing facilities, changing lives, both for competitive athletes and like everyday athletes who are just trying to like just get a start on their kind of fitness journey. So I was just so inspired to talk to kind of those two coaches and other coaches as well, right, about the effort that they put in. I think as well, like, especially Matt was like, and I've had this talking off pod with other affiliate owners, in that, like, whilst it's passion led, that doesn't mean that you have to kind of like go without in terms of business. Like, it needs to be sustainable business. You can run a business well, you can turn a profit, because if you can't kind of like, if you're having to worry about whether you can keep the lights on and kind of feed your family, how can you put more energy into kind of coaching your clients and coaching your members? And kind of Matt especially kind of made me kind of see that side of things, and that it's not, as an affiliate owner, it's not about going without. it's about kind of like, you know, and again, I'm probably doing it a disservice as not an affiliate owner myself, but that was something that really inspired me. And when I look at myself, like in my late 30s, I'm kind of like, oh, you know, never say never, right? So that's something I've got from that. The final other one I'll say, and that was I chatted to Reggie Fasser about a year after he'd gone pro and moved down to work with Steve at JST Compete, and he really opened up about the kind of trials and tribulations of going full time. I think you can look at Instagram and think it's all about kind of necking knocko and slinging tin, but the more time you have to train, he's kind of said it, the harder it becomes, because you're not having to fit it in around your other responsibilities. You've kind of like, you know, there's huge expectation and huge pressure. And I mentioned that I'm always hugely grateful and very humbled by those that are willing to come and chat to me on a podcast. But Reggie kind of opening up and talking about the real realities of kind of like going pro, it was really kind of like, it was an honor to kind of be able to share that, and I really appreciate him talking openly like that.
Yeah, I listened to that one. I think it was a great episode to see behind the curtain, and exactly like you say, you see on Instagram the highlight reel, and he is a really bubbly, lively, fun, happy guy. But I think he showed a bit more of a vulnerable side there, where it isn't all sunshine and rainbows living the pro athlete life. It is hard work, and it does, well, when it becomes your job rather than your passion or your hobby, it does apply a lot more pressure to the outcomes and the expectations people have of you. And yeah, I'd highly recommend checking that out if you haven't already listened to it. Great. And if you could pick a dream guest, who's on your list for like at the edge of your reach that you'd love to have on?
Oh, crikey. That puts me on the spot. I think a dream guest. Yeah, I mentioned I'm always kind of like UK centric. And one of the things I'm trying to do there, I'm just going to pick this out actually, is one of the things I'm going to try and do this. I'm coming towards the 100th episode, and I'm just going to put this out there. Who knows whether I'll be able to make it happen? I've lost track of number of episodes, so I might be saying I want to do it for my 100th episode. But one thing I'm going to try and do this year is I'm going to try and do a series with 15-year affiliate owners. And so I've spoken to a couple who are up at 15-year affiliates, but someone I've not managed to reach out to yet is, I think it's CrossFit London. They are the first affiliate in Europe, first affiliate in the UK, obviously. I don't even know if those that were involved at the beginning are still involved with the affiliate, but like for me, that would be pretty cool to kind of speak to those that have been involved like from the beginning. I must say, I like having spoken to kind of both Carl and Rachel Steadman, that, you know, I almost came off that one and was like, right, I'm quitting my job and I'm putting a red shirt on. But you know, that would be cool, recognizing, you know, I love being UK centric, to kind of get the first affiliate, those involved with the first affiliate in Europe and the UK on, to kind of talk about how they've seen the kind of like the methodology and the community grow over 15 years would be super cool.
That's really cool.
That's awesome. Tom, thank you so much for your time. It's been a fascinating chat. We've loved it.
I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
If people want to find out more about you, please give us your links for the podcast and your Instagram handle, please.
Will do, yeah. So the Instagram handle is @ChalkingFitness, all one word. Through that's the best way to kind of like access and the podcast through the kind of the typical link in the bio. And so you can get to the pod, you can get to the podcast through that. I also promote all the episodes through the Instagram channel. I recognize not everyone's on Instagram, but it's my main platform for not only promoting the podcast, but also creating a lot of other kind of like news content. If you're not an Instagram fan, then I have now got a newsletter that you can sign up for through Instagram, which might be a problem, but anyway, yeah. Where you can, so there's a lot of that, because again, I'm all about trying to create more and more news and media that is UK centric. So Instagram's the first place to start, @ChalkingFitness.
Amazing. Thank you, Tom, for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate the time that you give. Appreciate, as a new dad, that time is probably a bit finite at the moment, so really appreciate that. I thought it was really fascinating, Ash, don't you, that, you know, an insight from someone that's not necessarily a coach and doesn't have, as he mentioned, that doesn't have that skin in the game, and actually kind of hear maybe what the wider audience actually has to think about certain things. And I think that can sometimes be lost when you are involved in fitness as much as we are, that you sometimes don't always get the opportunity to stand back and actually hear like what the noise is saying, because we're just so involved in it. So really, really cool. Thank you very much. And if you haven't checked out his podcast, do check in the show notes down below. You'll see all down there, that Chalking Fitness. Head over to Instagram. But as always, if you did enjoy today's episode, please share it, as part of our competition for our 100th episode. All the details are now on our Instagram. So you can get our muscle imbalance assessment, 2 months of stronger group coaching, and also that 60-minute chat with Ash and me, all about your training, get some insights, or maybe you just want a bit of banter between us three. That'd be really cool. So thank you very much for your time, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, guys.